So hello all, this is Dr. Kritika. So I'm an MD biochemistry postgraduate from Japan. So today I'll be talking to you about fructose metabolism. So let's move on to the concept. Okay. So fructose metabolism. Without any further delay, let's move on to the specific learning objectives. So by the end of the class, I wish you all are able to define the sources and transporters involved in fructose metabolism, and in addition to describe the biochemical pathway of fructose metabolism, analyze the metabolic consequences of excess fructose consumption, explain the clinical significance of enzyme deficiencies in fructose metabolism, and explain the biochemical basis of signs and symptoms of enzyme deficiencies. So let's move on to what a fructose is. So as you all know, I think this is pretty much a fact which every one of you knows. So fructose is a ketohexose. So what do you mean by the word ketohexose here? So keto means the functional group is C double bond O, and hexose means it contains 6 carbon units. Okay, this is what this term ketohexose means, and as we all know, it is present in fruits, honey, corn syrup, and sucrose, and this exists in 5-membered ring structure called as furanose form. So this is the Haworth projection, because you can see that this ring has this is a 5-membered ring, right, as opposed to the 6-membered pyranose ring, which is the ring form of glucose. This is the furanose ring of fructose. This is called the Haworth projection, and this is the linear projection, which is called the Fisher's projection. Okay, so this is it. We can see the functional keto group at the second position. Okay, so this is in short about fructose. Let's move ahead. Okay, so now let's see how fructose gets absorbed. So imagine these tiny orange balls to be the fructose that is present in your food. So as soon as you take in food containing fructose, what happens is that it has to pass through the gut, right? So it has to get absorbed by the gut. So in the gut, which are the primary cells of absorption? As we all know, it's your enterocyte, right? So now there should be some gateway that has to open and let the fructose molecules into the gut, right? And that particular gate here is nothing but a GLUT5 molecules. Okay, so what happens? Fructose first enters into the enterocyte through these GLUT5 gate, and then it enters into the enterocyte. Now it has to exit or leave the enterocyte to enter into the bloodstream, right? So it should have another exit gate. So that exit gate is nothing but your GLUT2. Okay, so now fructose happily exits this enterocyte, and now it enters the blood vessels, and now it enters into its final pathway, which is your liver. So it homes into the liver. So once inside the liver, it undergoes metabolism. So now let's look at the steps of metabolism that happens in liver. Okay, so what happens in liver is the series of reactions which is similar to the glycolytic pathway. Okay, so now let's see what happens to fructose. So what was the first enzyme of glycolysis? If you could remember, it was hexokinase, right? So here you have something called fructokinase. Okay, so what is the function of a kinase? It simply adds phosphate group to this fructose moiety. So where is this phosphate added? It is added to the first carbon. Okay, so this fructose gets converted to fructose 1 phosphate, and since this is a kinase reaction, an ATP is hydrolyzed to form ADP. Fine, and moving ahead, what is the next reaction? The next reaction here is aldolase B. It immediately gets cleaved into glyceraldehyde and dihydroxyacetone phosphate. And moving ahead, what do you think is the next reaction? Dihydroxyacetone phosphate gets converted into glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate by this isomerase enzyme. And this glyceraldehyde, on the other hand, also forms glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate by this kinase. And ultimately, we end up with glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate, which undergoes further downstream steps of glycolysis. Okay, so what do we get as a result of glycolysis? So let's assume it's an aerobic glycolysis. What do we get? We get pyruvate, right? So we get pyruvate. So we end up getting pyruvate. So to summarize the steps of fructose metabolism, the first step is a kinase step, as opposed to your glucose metabolism. As opposed to hexokinase and glycolysis, we have something called fructokinase. So fructokinase adds phosphate moiety to this fructose sugar, and now this fructose 1 phosphate has to get cleaved into 2 compounds, right? So the two compounds that we get are glyceraldehyde and dihydroxyacetone phosphate. So what happens to this dihydroxyacetone phosphate? It then gets converted to glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate. Glyceraldehyde also gets converted to glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate. Okay, and then what happens to this glyceraldehyde 3 phosphate? It undergoes further downstream steps of your glycolysis, ultimately yields pyruvate. So what do we get out of pyruvate? We get acetyl CoA, right? Yeah, so we end up getting acetyl CoA. So I am saying that we have, as children, we have all been fancied by the statement that look, fruits are very healthy, right? Fruits are substances which we take in for health, right? So, but I'm saying you otherwise. Excess of consumption of fruit juices, especially those caned sugar, what is it? Canned fruit juices and other things, they are injurious to health. If a person takes excessive fruit juices, he'll land up getting liver cirrhosis in the long run. So isn't it a bit weird and curious at the same time? Yeah, so now let's see why this contradictory statement is so. Okay, so that is because when we compare fructose metabolism with glycolysis, okay, I'll say you an example. So imagine there are two brothers. Okay, so there are two brothers. Wait, I think I'll take 1 second. Yeah, so imagine there are two brothers. So this is brother A and this is brother B. Okay, so these are two brothers. So this red brother here, okay, so he is this very studious one, very, what to say, proficient in his what is it, academics, in sports and everything. He's what is it, teacher's pet, and he's obviously loved by everyone, and he is also this very student and obedient guy. Okay, so he is known to abide by every single rule. So he knows if there is a queue, he knows to respect the queue. And such as this brother A. This, let me name him as brother A, and this boy here is brother B. Okay, so this brother B is known to be so notorious. Okay, so he does not study well, he doesn't obey his teachers. So if there is a queue or something, he doesn't want to, what to say, abide by the queue. He just bypasses everything. He always expects a VIP treatment. Fine, so this is brother B. Okay, so with whatever I've said you earlier, I told you excess fructose consumption is injurious, right? So with whatever you know, now let me hear, just give me a statement. Amongst the two brothers, fructose and glucose, which one is this good studious one and which one is a notorious one? Yeah, as you rightly pointed out, it is glucose, which is this obedient brother A, whereas this is the fructose brother here, who is this notorious brother B. Right? So now let's see why this is so. Okay, so yeah, so now let's see why this is so. That is because if you analyze the pathway of glycolysis, we can see that glucose gets converted to. So first step was hexokinase step, and then you get fructose 6 phosphate ultimately after isomerase reaction. So this fructose 6 phosphate, it undergoes regulation by this enzyme called phosphofructokinase. Okay, so this phosphofructokinase is called as the gatekeeper or the regulatory enzyme of glycolysis. So this phosphofructokinase, he is more like the teacher. Okay, so based upon the availability of ATPs within the cell, it decides whether or not to let the glycolysis to happen or not. Okay, so he decides whether to turn on glycolysis or to turn it off, depending upon the availability of ATPs within the cell. Okay, so if there is excess of ATP that is there already in the cell, then glycolysis need not happen, right? So phosphofructokinase is the deciding factor here. So this glucose, being this good brother, he obeys all the instructions given by phosphofructokinase. If phosphofructokinase senses that there is excess ATP inside the cell, then it shuts down glycolysis. Glucose also obeys all the commands given by phosphofructokinase. On the other hand, do we have any such instructor here in fructose metabolism? No, right? There was only two enzymes involved in fructose metabolism. One was fructokinase and the other one was aldolase B. So we do not have any such instructor to what to say, to direct this notorious boy towards a desired fate. So what happens because of lack of any such regulatory enzyme here? Fructose ends up getting metabolized. So what is the ultimate product that we get? So fructose ultimately gave us pyruvate, and from pyruvate we end up getting acetyl CoA, right? And if you can recollect, can you just let me know, acetyl CoA is the substrate for which of which of the process, which of the pathways that you know of, which of the anabolic pathways that you know of? Because this is not an energy deprived state. Okay, so this is not an energy deprived state. We have taken in food, and that's why we have more of fructose now, and from fructose we have obtained acetyl CoA. So acetyl CoA should enter into another anabolic pathway. So which anabolic pathway needs acetyl CoA as a substrate? Yeah, that is nothing but your fatty acid synthesis. So because there is excess of acetyl CoA, yeah, this acetyl CoA cannot keep entering into TCA cycle, because TCA cycle at one point gets exhausted, because all the reserves of TCA cycle like oxaloacetate, all these substrates are like minimally present. They are not like abundant in numbers. Okay, so they are after one point in time, all the substrates of TCA cycle are used up, and hence acetyl CoA has nowhere to go. It ends up entering into fatty acid synthetic pathway. So there is going to be abundant of fatty acids that are produced. And what happens with this glyceraldehyde here? So this, from this glyceraldehyde we end up getting glycerol. So we have glycerol, and we also have fatty acids coming from acetyl CoA. So what is this combination going to give you? So we have fatty acids plus glycerol, which is going to combine and give us triacyl glycerols or triglycerides. So if there is more of triglycerides in your blood, what do we ultimately land up getting? So it's nothing but your fatty liver, right? So that is how fructose metabolism is linked to fatty liver. Okay, so the reasons yet again, high fructose intake and lipogenesis, they are linked because one thing is it is an unregulated metabolism. The second thing is acetyl CoA ends up entering into fatty acid synthetic pathway, and the precursors like dihydroxyacetone phosphate and glyceraldehyde, they also form glycerol. So we have glycerol and fatty acid, which is a very good combination, ends up producing excess of triacyl glycerols, triglycerides, and hence we land up getting fatty liver. So this is it. So this is in short about the metabolism. So now let's move on to a scenario. So this is a scenario of a 6-month-old infant. Sorry for the glitch here. Okay, a 6-month-old infant here is brought to the clinic with a history of vomiting, irritability, and lethargy. So one more important point here is it's a 6-month-old infant. So that's an important pointer here, and he has an history of vomiting, irritability, and lethargy after starting solid foods. Okay, this is one more important point to remember, and particularly fruits and sweetened cereals. Okay, the parents report that these symptoms occur soon after the baby consumes meals. The infant was previously exclusively breastfed without any issues. So what does it mean? As long as the baby was exclusively breastfed, it did not have any issues. So once the baby was put on supplementary feeds, it started producing symptoms of vomiting, irritability, and lethargy. Okay, and on examination the baby appears pale, irritable, drowsy with mild sorry for the missing words here, mild hepatosplenomegaly. Okay, so what do you mean by hepatosplenomegaly or hepatomegaly? So hepatomegaly is nothing but enlargement of liver. Okay, so the baby was previously breastfed, and as long as the baby was breastfed, the baby was doing fine. But later on, when the baby was put on supplementary feeds, it started developing features of hepatomegaly, which is enlargement of liver, and in addition the baby also had vomiting, irritability, and lethargy. Fine, so these are the pointers. Now can you guess the culprit behind these symptoms? So which of the metabolite so far that we discussed, or which of the substrate that we discussed so far was involved in this disease? Yeah, fructose. There should be something wrong with fructose metabolism, which is resulted in all these issues, right? But when we discussed about fructose metabolism, what were the two principal enzymes which were different from that of glycolysis? So the fructose metabolism was predominantly similar to your glycolysis, except for two enzymes which were unique to fructose metabolism. What were they? One was fructokinase, second one was aldolase B, right? So it should be something wrong with either of these two enzymes. Okay, so it should either be a mistake with fructokinase or a mistake or a defect with aldolase B. So now let's see which one is at fault. Okay, so this is hereditary fructose intolerance. This is a condition called hereditary fructose intolerance. So this is an autosomal recessive condition with an incidence of 1 in 20,000 live births. Okay, so this is manifested usually around 6 months of age. Why 6 months of age? Because until 6 months of age, every single baby that is born, we advise the mothers to exclusively breastfeed the kid, right? So only after 6 weeks we start the babies on supplementary diet. So only when the baby is put on supplementary diet, the baby undergoes the baby undergoes or baby enters into fructose metabolism, and hence all these manifestations begin to set in. Okay, so the defect here is due to aldolase B. So hereditary fructose intolerance is an autosomal recessive condition, and the defect here is aldolase B. So if you could recall the pathway, so can we go back to the pathway here? Yeah. So this aldolase B is defective. So if aldolase B is defective, which of the precursor gets accumulated? It is fructose 1-phosphate which gets accumulated. Okay, fructose 1-phosphate cannot move past aldolase B, so hence fructose 1-phosphate gets accumulated. Okay, so the precursor here is, or the thing that gets accumulated is fructose 1-phosphate. The symptoms, as discussed in the case scenario, the symptoms include hypoglycemia, hepatomegaly, jaundice, failure to thrive, and all these things. Okay, so now let's see why each of these symptoms manifest. So to begin with, hepatomegaly. Why hepatomegaly? For the simple reason that fructose metabolism is concerned with liver, and if something goes wrong in fructose metabolism, the precursor or the substrate that is accumulating, it is going to accumulate within the liver. So the liver has to enlarge, right? Something is accumulating within the liver enlarges. As simple as that. And because liver enlarges, they end up getting jaundice, right? So this is it. So now let's see why hypoglycemia. Okay, and there is one more feature which is hyperuricemia. Okay, so now let's see why hyperuricemia, why hypoglycemia, and other things. Fine. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, so now let's see the cause of hypoglycemia. So why hypoglycemia? That is because I told you the enzyme that is deficient in hereditary fructose intolerance is aldolase B. So hence, because aldolase B is deficient, what was accumulating? The thing that was accumulating was fructose 1-phosphate. Okay, so this fructose 1-phosphate, it inhibits something called glycogen phosphorylase. So glycogen phosphorylase is a key enzyme involved in glycogenolysis. Okay, so this is a regulatory enzyme of glycogenolysis. Since glycogen phosphorylase is allosterically inhibited by fructose 1-phosphate, glycogen cannot be broken down to glucose. So because glycogen cannot be broken down to glucose, the baby ends up getting hypoglycemia. But whenever there is hypoglycemia, it's not just glycogenolysis that is acting as a reserve for glucose, right? Glucose can be produced by non-carbohydrate substrates like lactate, alanine, etc., right? What is that pathway called? That's nothing but your gluconeogenesis, right? So gluconeogenesis can sit in and it can help the baby with hypoglycemia, right? So if the baby has hypoglycemia, maybe if glycogenolysis cannot help, gluconeogenesis can help the baby, right? So the baby ideally should not have hypoglycemia if gluconeogenesis sits in. But in HFI, that is in hereditary fructose intolerance, even gluconeogenesis is affected. Can you guess why? Any idea? Yeah, that is because what is accumulating? It is fructose 1-phosphate. Yeah, there is something called phosphate that is sequestering in the form of fructose 1-phosphate. So what is the energy currency of a cell? It is ATP. And gluconeogenesis is production of glucose from non-carbohydrate substances. And for production of glucose, it's similar to an anabolic pathway. So it requires energy, right? So it requires energy in the form of ATP. So for one molecule of glucose to be produced, it requires 6 ATPs. So 6 ATPs are consumed in the process of one cycle of gluconeogenesis, right? So because much of the phosphate is sequestered in the form of fructose 1-phosphate, ATP is not available. Okay, so ATP is not available to drive the gluconeogenesis forward, and hence because of the low ATP drive, gluconeogenesis does not set in and the baby ends up getting hypoglycemia. So there is accelerated hypoglycemia because both these glucose reserves, one thing glycogen and the other one gluconeogenesis, both these things they do not they are at fault, okay, because of aldolase B deficiency. Okay, so this is a reason why the baby lands up getting hypoglycemia. So now let's see why the baby has hyperuricemia. So any idea why hyperuricemia? It is in one way related to the reason that I said for gluconeogenesis, decreased gluconeogenesis. Any idea? Yeah, that's because as I said you, ATP is not formed. Okay, so if ATP is not formed, what is a precursor of ATP? The precursor of ATP is ADP, maybe the precursor of ADP. Then what is ATP? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. So the precursor is ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. The precursor of that is adenosine monophosphate. So much of phosphate is sequestered in the form of fructose 1 phosphate. So what is adenosine monophosphate minus a phosphate group? It is nothing but adenosine. So adenosine is the parent, I would say. So adenosine is the parent. To that, if you add one phosphate, it is AMP. If you add two phosphates, it is ADP. If you add three phosphate groups, it is ATP, right? So this adenosine is nothing but a purine, right? So this purine on degradation gives you what? Purine degrades into uric acid, and hence the patient has hyperuricemia. Okay, and why should the patient also has lactic acidosis? Any idea why? Because yeah, fructose metabolism is not happening properly, and hence ATP is not there. The energy currency of the cell is very less, so the cell needs energy in the form of ATP, right? So it accelerates the process of glycolysis. Okay, glucose metabolism is accelerated. So what do you get out of glycolysis? So as a result of glycolysis we get pyruvate if it is aerobic, but if you want energy immediately, it is always lactate that ends up getting produced. Okay, so lactate anaerobic glycolysis is like an immediate it immediately gives you the ATP, whereas if you end up getting pyruvate has to get converted to acetyl CoA, and acetyl CoA has to enter into TCA cycle, and from TCA cycle all the reducing equivalents has to enter into ETC, and then only we'll get ATP. But if lactate is produced, whatever the number of ATPs that are produced in an aerobic glycolysis is less, but then they are immediately available. So lactate is produced in accelerated amounts. Okay, so because fructose metabolism is utilizing ATPs in the form of sequestration of phosphate, there's going to be accelerated anaerobic glycolysis producing more of lactic acid. So that is one reason why there is increased lactic acid. And why uric acid? Why hyperuricemia? Hyperuricemia is happening because ATP is less, because all phosphate groups are sequestered in the form of fructose 1 phosphate, and hence the precursor of ATP, the ultimate precursor, which is adenosine, accumulates. So this adenosine is a purine which on degradation gives you uric acid. Okay, so this is a reason for hyperuricemia. And why hypoglycemia? There were two reasons. Fructose 1 phosphate is an allosteric inhibitor of glycogen phosphorylase. So glycogen cannot get converted to glucose, and because phosphate group is sequestered, ATP is not available for gluconeogenesis, and hence because both these reserves, glucose reserves, are not available, the patient has severe hypoglycemia. Okay, so this is the same thing that I've given. So what are the investigations that are expected? So as given in the case scenario, all the basic blood workup. So the basic blood workup will show you hypoglycemia, elevated liver enzymes. Why elevated liver enzymes? Because fructose 1 phosphate is accumulating within your liver, so there is hepatomegaly and jaundice, and all the liver enzymes will get elevated. And acid base status, there's going to be metabolic acidosis with elevated lactate, because there is lactate that is increasingly produced, that is going to cause lactic acidosis. And uric acid levels are also going to be increased because of purine degradation. Okay, so next is urine test. So urine analysis for reducing sugars will be positive, but it is negative for glucose, because fructose is also a sugar, but it's not a it's also a reducing sugar, but it's not glucose. Okay, So that is it. So moving ahead, confirmatory test, of course, the enzyme activity and genetic testing. So for any what is it, inborn error of metabolism, the confirmatory test would be either enzyme activity or genetic testing. Okay. And acute management, so management comprises of managing all the crisis. So hypoglycemia is a crisis state, right? So you first have to address the hypoglycemia by giving IV glucose, and you'll have to correct the acidosis as well. Long term management involves fructose, sucrose, and sorbitol free diet. So fructose free diet, it is very much okay, it's like saying it outright, fructose metabolism is at fault, so do not give fructose. So why sucrose free diet? That's also very evident because sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose. So sucrose also should be avoided. Why sorbitol free diet? Any idea? Because sorbitol can also form fructose. In which pathway? So sorbitol dehydrogenase is an enzyme which can give you fructose. Okay, so this is an enzyme which gives you fructose. So hence sorbitol also should be what to say avoided. Okay, so this is about HFI. Now let's move on to yet another condition, because there were two enzymes. There should be disorders associated with both these enzymes, right? So with the first enzyme, with the second enzyme, aldolase B, the condition was called as hereditary fructose intolerance. We saw all the features of hereditary fructose intolerance. So there was one other enzyme which is fructokinase. So fructokinase enzyme deficiency results in essential fructosuria. So the only manifestation here is excretion of fructose in urine, nothing else. Otherwise, the patient is all healthy and fine. And other findings are urine will be positive for Benedict's and Selivanov's and Folger's test. So we all know Selivanov's and Folger's test are tests done to detect the presence of fructose. So what is this? So this is your Benedict's test, which is positive, and this is your Selivanov's test. If it is red in color, it is Selivanov's test, and this is your Folger's test. Okay, so Folger's test will give you blue color, Selivanov's test will give you red color, and Benedict's test will give you depending upon amount of glucose that is present, glucose or fructose that is present, the color produced will vary. It's a semi-quantitative test. Okay, so this is about essential fructosuria. So there is one question for you all. What makes essential fructosuria a benign condition compared to hereditary fructose intolerance? So I told you in essential fructosuria, there is only one manifestation, that is excretion of fructose in urine. Otherwise, the patient will be all right. Okay, he'll not have any other manifestation as that seen in hereditary fructose intolerance. Any idea why? Yeah, as you rightly thought. So the essential fructosuria, so I'll write the thing again, the metabolic pathway again. So the metabolic pathway for fructose is fructose gets converted to fructose 1 phosphate by the enzyme fructokinase. Okay, and then this fructose 1 phosphate gets cleaved into, it gets cleaved into two things. One is glyceraldehyde, okay, glyceraldehyde and dihydroxyacetone phosphate, and further on downstream steps are similar to that of glycolysis. And what is this enzyme here? The enzyme involved here is aldolase B. Okay, aldolase B. So this aldolase B deficiency results in HFI, whereas fructokinase deficiency results in fructosuria, essential fructosuria. So in essential fructosuria, what is getting accumulated is just fructose. So fructose inherently does not lead to any of the manifestations, because in aldolase B deficiency, what is accumulating is fructose 1 phosphate. Majority of the symptoms like hypoglycemia occurs because fructose 1 phosphate is an allosteric inhibitor of glycogen phosphorylase, right? So hypoglycemia and hyperuricemia and what else? Hyperuricemia, lactic acidosis, and hepatomegaly. All these things were attributed to what is called your fructose 1 phosphate accumulation. Because of phosphate sequestration, they manifested all these features. But in fructokinase deficiency, what is getting accumulated is just your fructose, which is considered to be relatively less toxic. Okay, so that is why essential fructosuria is considered a benign condition as compared to hereditary fructose intolerance. Okay, So this is it. So now that we have mastered fructose metabolism, let's try to help him now. So we'll get back to the case it again. So this was this 6-month-old infant who was brought to the clinic with a history of vomiting, irritability and lethargy after starting solid foods, particularly fruits and sweetened cereals. The parents report that these symptoms occur soon after the baby consumes meals. The infant was previously exclusively breastfed without any issues. On examination, the baby appears pale, irritable, drowsy, with mild hepatomegaly, and laboratory investigations reveal hypoglycemia, elevated liver enzymes, lactic acidosis, hyperuricemia, etc. And urine analysis shows the presence of reducing sugars but no glucose. So it's very evident now. So what's the diagnosis? Yeah, it's a short case of hereditary fructose intolerance. Okay, so what is the enzyme that is deficient here? The enzyme that is deficient here is aldolase B. So what were the features? So okay, the features are given here right away. So first thing is hepatomegaly. That is because fructose 1-phosphate is accumulating within the hepatocytes, leading to hepatocyte ballooning. Okay, why hypoglycemia? Two reasons. One is gluconeogenesis is not happening because ATP is not available. Glycogenolysis is not happening because fructose 1-phosphate is an allosteric inhibitor of glycogen phosphorylase. And why elevated liver enzymes? Again, because of accumulation. Lactic acidosis because excessive anaerobic glycolysis sets in because of the deficiency of ATP. Okay, why hyperuricemia? Hyperuricemia because ATP is not available. So the precursor of ATP, which is adenosine, accumulates. Adenosine on degradation gives you uric acid and hence hyperuricemia. Okay, so why typically all these features after 6 months of age, especially after starting solid foods? Because till 6 months of age, the baby is breastfed. Okay, so only after 6 months the baby is exposed to fructose and only then all these symptoms manifest. Fine. So this is it. So coming to the management of HFI, as I told you earlier, acutely you'll have to address its hypoglycemia and acidosis. And for long-term management, we'll have to give not just fructose. It is called FSS diet. Okay, FSS free diet, fructose, sucrose, and sorbitol free diet. Okay, so this is it. So to summarize, we began with the sources and transporters involved. So we looked at the sources. We all know honey, corn syrup, all those things, they are rich in fructose. And transporters, so we had one gate letting the fructose inside the enterocyte and the other gate which helped in exit of fructose from the enterocyte. So that was the first one was GLUT5 and the second one, the exit gateway, is GLUT2. Okay, so this is about sources and transporters. Biochemical pathway, only two enzymes, one is fructokinase, the other one is aldolase B. And clinical significance of enzyme deficiencies, again two enzymes, so two enzyme deficiencies. Fructokinase deficiency results in essential fructosuria, and second thing, which is aldolase B deficiency, results in hereditary fructose intolerance. Metabolic consequences of excessive fructose consumption. Yeah, if you take in excessive fructose, what happens? You end up producing more of pyruvate, and from pyruvate we get acetyl CoA. Acetyl CoA is a substrate for fatty acids, so we get more of fatty acids, and from glyceraldehyde we get glycerol. Glycerol plus fatty acid gives you triacylglycerols or triglycerides, and this triglycerides is known to cause fatty liver. Okay, and biochemical basis of signs and symptoms of enzyme deficiencies, of course we already discussed right now. So this is it. So thank you all. Keep revising fructose metabolism. This is a favorite area of examiners in with regard to your NEET PG questions. Okay, all the best and thank you.